It's my privilege to speak to you today. Just to say, before I used to do this sort of thing, some people will know, you may not do, I used to be an engineer. I've got a picture that may come up on the screen of me at work in my former life. I used to design and build roads and bridges. I'm the bloke in the big yellow coat, white hat. That's me. On that particular day, we were trying to build a road over a marsh and a bridge over a railway. It was quite muddy, as you can see. I'd stepped out of the way of somebody and stepped into quite a lot of mud. It became necessary for me to dig my own feet out of the mud. So Jason there is kindly handing me a spade and I'm getting on with it. What a day that was. Now, for me as an engineer, there was something really interesting about how roads and bridges connected places. I quite like the idea of it. Because, of course, that is all connecting people. And that's really important. Every connection that we built, every road and bridge thing, depended on us determining and understanding what was or was not already in the place of connection. We needed to know what was there where we would be building. What did we already have? What would we need in order to achieve that? What would we need to find? Because ultimately, we needed to find something dependable, something solid and reliable to build on. On that particular site, we had to dig down quite a long way to do that. We dug a large hole and dropped an excavator in it and watched it disappear into the ground in order to make a bedrock for the bridge. So today, though, I want to talk not particularly about my engineering life. That's enough of that, I'm sure. But I want to talk about how our lives connect together. Jesus came into the world, as he described it himself, to be the way for our lives to connect together. He was the one that we can build our lives upon. And in the Bible, as John begins to describe his good news about Jesus, he says these words in John chapter 1 and verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus came in flesh and he dwelt among us to build something, to connect lives together. And he did that full of grace and truth. And that's what I want us to think about together this morning as we think how our lives will connect together. To think of some of the whys of that as we understand what Jesus did for us. Firstly, he dwelt. John tells us that Jesus dwelt among us in order to connect our lives. Now, clever people have explained to me that the term dwelt among us literally meant he tabernacled. In other words, Jesus pitched his tent next to us. He set up camp here on earth. As one writer puts it, he moved into the neighborhood. There are two really striking things, it seems to me, about Jesus dwelling among us that John wants us to grasp. Firstly, it's where God wants to be. John was echoing this using the term of tabernacle was echoing something that people understood from their history, where, and we can read it in the Old Testament of our Bibles in Exodus 25, where God was, excuse the pun, intent. He was intent on living like his tent-dwelling people. And he wanted to live right in the middle of them. God chose to dwell, to be tangibly there, to be here, to be obviously around. God wants to be present with us. What a powerful idea that is to understand. What are we conscious of in, as present around us? I don't know how many people here have got smartphones. I'm guessing maybe half of us. I don't know. I'm told that in our waking hours, we check our smartphones every 4.3 minutes. What are we checking? Why? Communication gadgets can bring us closer, or they can so totally distract us that even when we're with someone else, we're not entirely close to them. Are you closer to a gadget or a person? Do you want to be connected, or are you happy to be distracted? God chose to dwell among us because he wanted to be present with us. He dwelt among us. That's amazing. Because the second striking thing about this is that this dwelling among us was really up close and personal. You see, camping is like that, isn't it? People who camp will know only too well that you don't have that many secrets from the people in the tent next door. There are just a couple of sheets of canvas between your goings-on and all of their goings-on. There's some knowing smiles from the New Day crowd. The thing is, for us, that kind of up close and personal means a greater awareness of our own faults. But with God, up close and personal means a greater awareness of his glory. So up close is not awkward for God. It's what he wants as he chooses to dwell with us. He wants us to see and know his glory. God's intention for his glory was that it would be living among us, that it would be visible, that it would be present. Not special times in special buildings, present, dwelling among us. That's where God pitches his tent. Where do we pitch our tent? Where do we choose to place our lives to say, I want to be right in the middle of that? Where are we hoping to make impact for good as God chooses to come and work in the mud of our lives? God chose to live dangerously close to us because his relationship to us meant that much. God lived close enough to us to be killed by us. How close do you choose to live for him? Close enough to be annoyed sometimes? Close enough to be taken advantage of? close enough to be really hurt? If we want to be more like Jesus, we should get closer to people, even the dangerous ones. Following Jesus means living dangerously close to others. Following Jesus is meant to bring you closer to other people, those who are following him too, those who don't even think that following him is a good idea yet. Because that is where you are most likely to encounter his glory. Not at special times in special buildings, but right in the middle of where he is living, where he chooses to dwell. And as John thinks about being full of grace and truth, we understand a little bit more of what that closeness is like. So let's think about that. He lived full of grace. Grace may be a word that gets bandied around. I don't know how much it means to us. We may use it. Grace speaks about favor, about benevolence and mercy. Grace is something that seems to be free and almost effortless. Someone who dances gracefully, which would not be me. I don't dance because people would get hurt if I did. But someone who moves gracefully moves free of effort. There's something of freedom about grace. But grace is actually, first and foremost, about our attitude, our words, our actions, and other people's perception of them. Because grace ultimately lives and exists in relationships. You can't top up on grace at a More Grace conference. We have a grace gauge, you see. I think we all know this, although sometimes we think that we might be able to. I reckon we all have a grace gauge, and it registers whenever we meet people. So that whether or not we remember what they did or what we said, we remember how they made us feel. And that is your graceometer. How much grace there was in us. But Jesus was full of grace, he tells us. It means that it was always enough for relationship. It doesn't run low, and it never ran out. Full of grace. That must mean some sense of overflow to everyone who was around him. Not just enough grace for himself, but grace for every other. What are the grace levels like in your life? How are you making other people feel? Do they register God's grace in you? Before Carol and I could ever have children, we felt God tell us that we would have a daughter and that we would call her Hannah. I think that's probably not because God wanted to give us a special little word about children, but because he loves her so much. Because the name Hannah means God's grace. I don't think I'm giving away any family secrets if I suggest there have been a few moments for me to consider my response to my daughter's behaviour. Does any parent understand what I mean by that? Now, in that, I've needed to think what grace I might have for someone that God told me to call Grace. As a parent, do I want to treat her how she deserves to be treated? Do I find a sense of, what sense of grace do I have for that? Because actually in all of our human relationships, we, if we're honest, experience this relentless urge to treat someone just exactly how they deserve. What do you mean they've left it here? They need to be told they can't stick that like that, or they can't speak like that, or how can they carry on like this? Someone needs to tell them. And that someone is usually me. I'll tell them. Yeah. Treating people not better than they deserve seems to be a default setting for too many of us. But if we are going to prove that Jesus is really something, we've got to change that in our lives. We felt we were told to speak God's grace over our daughter every time we say her name. Every time we speak to her. What can we say that speaks of favour, of kindness, and of mercy? In other words, we felt challenged to speak in ways for God's good before hers or before ours. What a radically different way to approach relationships. What does that look like in any of our relationships? When we have an issue in a relationship, we would usually go one of two ways. We either minimize it or we maximize it. To minimize an issue in a relationship is saying, yeah, okay, I don't like this about that relationship, but that's not really that important. What I need to do is refocus on what is actually important, which will usually be whatever I wanted in the first place. And in that way, instead of putting hope or believing in the relationship, we are trusting in something else, the goal, whatever else it was we wanted, or maybe in someone else. That relationship wasn't that important to me anyway. We choose a different situation, different circumstance or a plan, and head on my way. Or we maximize it. And when that happens, we decide that, they are so like that and they're never going to change. It's impossible. There's nothing I can do to change this, so I might as well not bother. And cynicism usually kicks in just about there. To say that this relationship, my issue with this relationship is beyond hope. It is hopeless. In fact, everything is hopeless. What if instead of minimizing or maximizing, we took every responsibility for our heart attitude in relationships? What if we focused on ways that I need to change? The battle for relationships is not one of making someone else suitable for me, but of letting God make me suitable for other people. And this way says that I can hope in God for now and for this. I wonder, can you think of one relationship which you have that might be changed by that kind of attitude? Could you imagine all of your relationships being like that? I wonder, could you call everyone that you meet, whatever they deserve, could you call them Hannah? What are the limits of your grace? Now, some people might feel there's a bit of a flaw in this, Steve. People will see me as some kind of pushover. I see, you're telling us all to be Christian doormats now, are you? We're kind of easy pickings for the user type of people. How do I avoid being taken for a ride? How do I decide when enough is enough? Well, my answer is that you do that by looking at Jesus and listening to him. We decide in a relationship not by rules, this much and no more. Jesus had that with his disciples. How many times should I forgive? We don't do it by rules as if there's a count and like, whoop, numbers up, bing, good. Right, now I give them what they deserve. No, we don't live by rules, but by relationship. We live in relationship with Jesus, and we live for him. We let that flood our relationships with grace. We don't do it by looking at the individual and what they deserve. We look at Jesus and remember what we don't deserve in him. He was full of grace, and it flooded his relationship. He was also full of truth. Truth is trustworthiness, it's faithfulness, it's rock steady, unwaveringness. Truth is not impersonal either. Truth is revelation, redemption, and change. Truth always takes a place in relationships, a bit like grace. Truth isn't merely facts. Now, of course, truth is absolute. And maybe that's where some might mistakenly reduce truth to absolute fact. The thing is, truth is something that is revealed by and shared in relationship. It always is. That's why Jesus came. That's why forgiveness is such a big deal for God. Forgiveness is the oxygen of relationship. And therefore, it's like the lifeblood of truth. And as that lifeblood of truth flows, it brings healing, and it brings change, and it brings growth. We need to understand that, the importance of that, what we might expect to know in no other way except for in relationship. And understanding strength and weakness is important to that too. We think we need to come to relationship with strength to be a good friend, but actually weakness is usually better. Delusions of power will always impede relationship. Weakness never did. So the most powerful one, Jesus, came as a helpless babe to dwell among us, to reveal truth to us. So why do we buy the line that we need to get our stuff together before relationship? I couldn't go to a life group and talk about stuff and ask people to pray for me. I've got to sort myself out somehow. Why do we buy that line? What truth do you think Jesus needed to dwell among us to make certain that we knew? Was it that he's holy? Was it that he's righteous and the judge of righteousness? Nah, I don't think so. You don't need to get near to people to judge them, do you? You know that. However, the nearer you get to them, the more likely they are to recognize your love, your kindness, and your care. Jesus needed to dwell among us so that we would know the truth of his love. And as we choose to relate together, we will discover that, the love of God, through each other's kindness and care. That's part of God's purpose and plan for the church. It was Jesus' intention that people would recognize God's love through his disciples. He's pretty clear about that with them. In their love for each other, that it would speak of God's love. The trouble is, lots of us wrestle with who we actually are. Self-awareness seems to take a little while to get good at in life. We all can get mixed up ideas of who we are. What is the truth of who I am, and how do people see me? What have I become? One individual suggested that who you actually are, which is a fascinating idea, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I don't know if you've come across this idea before. It fascinated me as I discovered it recently. You are the average, so you should by now be wondering, okay, who are the people? Are some people in my house? Are there people at work? Are they people I make a priority to spend social time with? In what ways am I like them? It offers you a fairly sort of ready, maybe a bit rough and ready, practical assessment if you say, yeah, I'm not entirely self-aware what I'm like. Well, what are those 5 people like? Do they moan a lot? How quickly do they get bored? How quickly do they forgive? How quickly do they say sorry? Are they particularly cynical or critical? Are they generous? Are they helpful? What are they like at listening? How do the people you spend time most with handle criticism? What do they do with the benefit of the doubt? When they would like it, or maybe when someone else needs it? What's the difference between their behaviour and their view of other people's actions? If you know the answers to those questions, now take a look at yourself and consider how much you may have taken on board from them. We all need to wonder what kind of truth people get from our lives. We will invariably pick up some from others that we spend time with. It rubs off. Whether or not it's really truth, we'll take that. What conscious choices do we take about our company? The people we spend time with, and therefore the attitudes we will collect from them. Maybe we just blame them for who we are. Well, I'm so grumpy because they're always annoying me. What about taking responsibility for who we are to them? This is what Jesus dwelling among us means. We are all full of something which overflows to people who are around us, whether or not it's the truth. Jesus came to get close enough for us to know the truth, for it to overflow to us in relationship. Now, if grace is how you leave people feeling, I would ask you here, what do you leave people thinking about? Will they be more or less, what things will they be more or less certain about once they have met you? Are they thinking more about judgment or love? What will you bring to those people that you spend time with? Jesus dwelt among us, John tells us, full of grace and truth. He was fully alive, offering us connection with him and with each other because of him. How much Jesus' life, how much grace and truth we know will depend on what we choose in our connection with him and in our connection with each other. Now, I already know you don't make many New Year's resolutions, but most New Year's resolutions seem to be about physical improvement. The most common ones are more exercise and less weight. There's a bunch of other ones vaguely associated to that afterwards. I wonder if part of the reason we give up on them so readily is because they don't really make us more fully alive. Not many people make resolutions about relationships. They're more about what I would like to experience, what I would like to achieve, what I would like to be like by next Christmas. But what would you resolve about your relationships at TKC this year by next Christmas? What would you resolve about your group expectations? Maybe you are already in a life group. Maybe you're already part of it and you sort of go. What would it mean to go there looking for the glory of God there? What would it mean to go there thinking, are any of these people like one of my five? Am I any one of their five? That I might impart truth to them of what life is, help them to be more fully alive. What would you, maybe you haven't been involved in a life group, what would you decide about getting involved with a group for the first time? I get it. God came to live really close to me. I need to get over that holding people at arm's length thing. Because God calls me close. I want to know God better, and I might find it hard knowing other people, but if I know I'm going to know more of God, that's a bit of a game changer. Maybe I should try a life group. What will you decide about getting involved with a group or back involved with a group? Yeah, I've been to a group. It was okay sometimes, and then it wasn't, and then I stopped going. God chose to dwell among us, dangerously close. Anyone fancy a dangerous life group this year? What would it mean to choose to say, well, yeah, it was a bit annoying, or this bit worked and that didn't. But I understand how God calls me to commit my life to individuals. I need to find a way back into this. I need to find a way to relate to individuals where I'm looking for God, and when they are looking for God and they look at me, they see something of Him. Let's pray.